If you love me, please don't judge me. Got my hands tied, the power's above me. Don't shoot the messenger, I'm just a puppet here. If you wanna place blame, then look to the puppeteer. Family, fortune, envy, jealousy, privilege, passed on, legacy, secret, sabotage, borderline, felony, suicide, subtract, selfish, pedigree, yeah.
Ah, yes, Throwback Week, the one time a year where we throw it back and pay tribute to some of the past and present legends of NASCAR today. With the paint schemes, of course, with a lot of drivers and teams throwing it back to either legends of the sports to honor them, or maybe honor themselves in their early days coming up in this NASCAR world, or on just the short track scene in general. But yeah, Throwback Week is officially here for Mother's Day weekend at Darlington with the Goodyear 400. And of course, this year's throwback schemes are going to look a little bit fucked up though. Mainly because of the number placement thing. To be perfectly honest, this weekend would have been the perfect time to have the number placement be optional or go back to normal. But hey, I think with some of these paint schemes though, the number placement can work if you do it correctly and just make a few changes to the paint scheme. But yeah, anyway, I'll talk more about the number placement at the end of the video. But yeah, anyway, let's go ahead and let's take a look at this year's batch of throwback schemes. So to start off the throwback schemes, we're going to do some that I have not done with when I went through the throwback schemes the last few years. We're going to do two paint schemes at the exact same time. We're going to do a 2-for-1 sale. So for this one, we're going to have Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez's throwback schemes because they throw back to the exact same race. For Ross Chastain's, it's a throwback to the paint scheme that Dale Jr. ran in the exhibition race at Japan at Twin Ring Motegi in 1998. And for Daniel Suarez, it's a throwback to Dale Sr.'s paint scheme that he ran in the exact same exhibition race at Japan at Twin Rings Motegi in 1998. So yeah, both paint schemes are really cool. I like both schemes, you know. And of course, Suarez, of course, throwing her back for Dale gobbles. That's going to really confuse the boomers that hate Suarez. It's going to be a lot of confused screaming. But yeah, of course, also the Coca-Cola thing. So yeah, both paint schemes did a really good job. And also, update on Chastain's scheme. They actually had to put a slash in the 1 on Chastain's paint scheme because of copyright issues from guess who? That fucking wicked bitch of the South, Teresa Earnhardt. Yep, because Teresa Earnhardt's a fucking bitch that doesn't care about anybody but herself. So yeah, they actually had to change Chastain's paint scheme because of Teresa Earnhardt. But not Daniel Suarez's. Suarez's gets to be okay, but not Chastain's. So let's pump the brakes here. So she's gonna demand Chastain to change his paint scheme, but not Suarez's? The fuck kind of backwards pageantry is that? Like, if you're gonna force one team to change the paint scheme, then force the other to do it. But honestly, both paint schemes shouldn't have been changed, and Teresa Earnhardt should just kindly fuck off and never return. Honestly, why couldn't have she gone instead of Dale Sr.? Like the racing gods took the wrong person away back in the 2001 Daytona 500. Teresa should have gone instead of Dale Sr. And maybe the racing gods would have agreed if they saw what Teresa would have become after the 2001 Daytona 500. But yeah, honestly, both paint schemes are good, but fuck Teresa Earnhardt. Alright, so the next paint scheme we got here, we have Austin Cindric's throwback scheme, as this paint scheme is supposed to be a throwback scheme to the Kodak scheme that Rusty Wallace ran in 2005. Now, for this paint scheme, I'd say this is the worst throwback scheme this weekend. Mainly because this paint scheme isn't close to what that Kodak scheme was. Because one, those green little spikes there, those spikes on the Kodak car were actually red. And the overall color of the car, it was a darker shade of yellow. Like, I'll give them kudos, though. They had the right concept. They had the right paint scheme concept, but they botched the colors completely on it. I mean, this botch, though, it's a lot better than that fucking bullshit Ricky Stenhouse Jr. pulled last year and JTG. This paint scheme being the worst. It isn't a knock on the Penske Racing because they tried to put an effort to get close to it. They just messed up a couple colors. Like, if they actually got the color scheme right for it, then this would have been a good paint scheme. But because of that, I just gotta say it's a dud. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Kevin Harvick. Now for Harvick, he's throwing it back to the ream, chasing the paint scheme that he ran in 2011 and 2012 in support of breast cancer awareness because, you know, you gotta save them titties. But yeah, it's still a pretty good scheme, you know. Really like this scheme, you know. Also paying tribute to a worthy cause against the fight for breast cancer. So yeah, of course, you know. Yeah, this is a really good paint scheme. I always liked this paint scheme when Harvick ran this paint scheme back at RCR. Because this was back at Harvick's RCR days. But yeah, still, nice looking paint scheme for sure. This is a good paint scheme right here. Now, the next paint scheme we got here, we have Kyle Larson's paint scheme. Now, for Larson's paint scheme, he's throwing it back to the paint scheme that Tim Richmond ran in the Busch Series in 1984. For Hendrick Motorsports, back when it was called All-Star Racing. I believe they changed it to HMS somewhere in the late 80s. But yeah. So yeah, Tim Richmond, he still raced for HMS before coming to 1986. But it was in the Busch Series, which was what the Xfinity Series used to be called. But yeah, really nice looking paint scheme. They really nailed the fuck out of this game. Really like this scheme. You know, liked it. You know, so yeah, really cool paint scheme. Throwing it back to HMS's inaugural season. Since HMS's first season in NASCAR was 1984. So yeah, really like this paint scheme. They did a really good job nailing it and paying tribute to the late Tim Richmond. So yeah, rest in peace, Tim Richmond. As Tim Richmond will still go down as one of the biggest what-ifs in NASCAR. What if Tim Richmond stayed healthy? What if he never got AIDS? What if he learned what a condom was? Could he have won a championship or more races, be a star in the sport? To answer that question, the answer is yes, he would have won a title sometime in the 80s before Jeff Gordon showed up. He would have got HMS that first title before Jeff Gordon showed up to HMS. Because, yeah, he would have took a number of wins and maybe titles away from the likes of Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt and Bill Elliott and Darrell Waltrip, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, still, nice looking paint scheme here for sure. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Brad Keselowski's scheme. Now for Brad Keselowski, he's throwing it back to the paint scheme that Mark Martin ran in 2004 for Roush Fenway Keselowski. Back when I believe it was still called Roush, because they didn't change it to Roush Fenway until 2008. And then it became Roush Fenway Keselowski in this year. But yeah, still, really nice looking paint scheme, and they did make some alterations to the paint scheme to complement the number placement. So yeah, this paint scheme is an example that the number placement could work with Throwback Weekend if done correctly and you just make a couple alterations to the paint scheme. So yeah, really good paint scheme, and they did a great job of making the perfect alterations to the scheme to make it fit the number placement. So yeah, really good job here from Keselowski and RFK Racing. For Brad Keselowski's first Throwback scheme as an owner-driver, excellent job there. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Corey LaJoie's paint scheme. And I think Corey LaJoie might have the best throwback paint scheme of this weekend, because Corey LaJoie's paint scheme, it's a throwback to the paint scheme that Marty Robbins ran in 1964. And this paint scheme, man, like, they paid attention to detail. Like, they even got the additional 2 7s in there, so it's the 777 digits, so it's a triple digit number, but will still be listed as 7 on the entry list for LaJoie. Because in NASCAR, you can't have an actual number above fucking 100. The highest you can be is 99. But yeah, like Corey LaJoie perfectly nailed this paint scheme. Like, they nailed nearly every single miraculous detail on this paint scheme. So yeah, really great job by Corey LaJoie and Spire Motorsports nailing this paint scheme. Really like it. Excellent job by that team getting this paint scheme down flat again. Every detail on it. Perfect job there. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Chase Elliott's paint scheme. Now Chase Elliott's, he's throwing it back to the paint scheme that Jimmy Means ran in 1993 in the 52 car. So yeah, Chase Elliott, his team, they did an excellent job nailing this paint scheme, getting all the details there, even getting the right number font and right font coloring. They really did a great job with this paint scheme, nailing it. You know, Chase Elliott's had some really good throwback schemes, and they've nailed it quite a few of them. So yeah, really like this paint scheme. Great job from that Elliott and that 9 team nailing this one. Now, the next paint scheme we got here, we have Denny Hamlin's paint scheme. Now, for Hamlin's paint scheme, he's throwing it back to himself. And he's throwing it back to the paint scheme that he won the 2016 Daytona 500 in. Yes, it's hard to imagine that this paint scheme from 6 years ago is now considered a throwback paint scheme. And they also did a pretty good Photoshop edit there of trying to actually get that right number placement there with the paint scheme to when Hamlin won the 500 that year with that photo. So yeah, I mean, out of all the FedEx paint schemes, I did like that one he ran in 2016 the most. That was a really good one. You know, it is a good paint scheme, and they did a great job nailing it. However, I feel like it was kind of a little too early or too soon to do that throwback scheme. Maybe Hamlin should have thrown it back a little earlier, but that's just a minor nitpick. Still, great job by Hamlin and that 11 team of nailing that throwback scheme. Now, the next paint scheme we got here, we have Chase Briscoe's paint scheme. Now, Briscoe's paint scheme, he's throwing it back to his boss, Tony Stewart's paint scheme that he ran in the 2001 Indy 500. So we got a NASCAR IndyCar crossover with this paint scheme. And also 2001, it was the year that Tony Stewart did the Charlotte Indy Double, and Tony Stewart is still the only driver to this day that has ran the full 1,100 miles in the Charlotte Indy Double. And Tony Stewart actually finished top 5 in both races that year. Tony Stewart has been the closest to ever sweeping the Charlotte Indy Double. It's never been done before. Just gonna throw that out there. But anyway, onto this paint scheme though. They really did a good job nailing this paint scheme there. You know, really cool paint scheme. You know, I mean, that Tony Stewart IndyCar paint scheme was always cool too. So yeah, it's pretty cool to see. What a few knocks on is that Chris Buescher was Chase Briscoe was already doing a throwback to Tony Stewart, to be perfectly honest. Because the primary Mahindra Tractors paint scheme is a perfect representation of Tony Stewart's paint scheme that he won the 2011 championship in. But that's just also a nitpick too, so gonna give it 1 or 2 knocks for originality, since Briscoe is already technically doing a throwback to Tony Stewart's paint, to his boss, Tony Stewart. But still, this is a good throwback paint scheme to do here for sure. So yeah, overall, still a good paint scheme there, nonetheless. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Chris Buescher's paint scheme. Now for Chris Buescher, he's throwing it back to the paint scheme that Matt Kenseth ran in 2004. And this paint scheme, they really nailed it here, especially making the perfect alterations to complement the number placement. So yeah, really great job by Buescher and the Roush family Keselowski for nailing this paint scheme and these throwbacks. Like, out of everyone with the number placements, they've nailed it the best here. With, you know, Keselowski's paint scheme and now Buescher's paint scheme, like Roush family Keselowski is easily the perfect example that the number placement can work for throwback schemes if done correctly, and you make the perfect alterations to the scheme to complement it. So yeah, really great job for Buescher and RFK for this. Great job. Now, the next paint scheme we got here, we have Kyle Busch's paint scheme. Now, Kyle Busch's throwback scheme was decided in a fan vote, as the fans were tasked to choose between 5 different cars, since this is M&M's and Mars Chocolate Company's last season in NASCAR, as they'll be out of the sport at the end of the year. So, after a fan vote, the fans have spoken. They chose that Kyle Busch will throw it back to the M&M's paint scheme that Ernie Irvan ran in 1998. So, yeah, this paint scheme is pretty cool. Really like this scheme. You know, I would have preferred maybe like the 2002 or maybe even the 2008 M&M scheme. I would have said 2003, but we've already done that one, or maybe even 2007. But still, this is still a good paint scheme nonetheless. You know, for Kyle Busch in his last year having M&M's as his primary sponsor, And of course, we're not going to talk about Kyle Busch's potential future in the sport after post in 2023 and beyond. So yeah, that will be a topic for another day. But still, this paint scheme, they did a really good job nailing this paint scheme here. Really great job in Eminem's last ride. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Christopher Bell's paint scheme. Now this paint scheme, Bell is throwing it back to the Sirius XM paint scheme that he ran in the Truck Series during his Truck Series Championship season in 2017. Now for this paint scheme, they did a great job nailing this scheme. It's a really good paint scheme, not gonna lie there. Here's the one knock I have on it. They've already done a throwback scheme to 2017. To that 2017 championship scheme. They did a throwback to that scheme in 2020, 2 years ago. So overall, though, it at least gets a 2 out of 10 for originality because they've already done this before. It's still a great paint scheme. I'm not going to knock it off on design. I'm just knocking it on originality because they've already done a throwback to 2020, to that 2017 Truck Series season. So yeah, I felt like they could have done a lot more with this paint scheme. Because they've already done 2017. But still a good paint scheme nonetheless. Now the next paint scheme we got here, we have Harrison Burton's paint scheme. Now for Harrison Burton, he's throwing it back and paying tribute to his father, Jeff Burton. As this is a throwback to the paint scheme that Jeff Burton ran in 2000 for Roush Fenway Keselowski. So yeah, this paint scheme, they really nailed this paint scheme, even making the perfect alterations for the number placement. Really did a great job here, you know, paying tribute to his father during his dad's good run since 2000, to be perfectly honest. 2000 was the closest that Jeff Burton has ever come to a championship. Like, that season was the closest Jeff Burton should have came to a title, but just fell short. So yeah, really great job nailing this paint scheme. So now Harrison Burton adds himself to the short list of drivers in the Cup Series that have paid tribute to their father in a throwback paint scheme. The two I know for sure, there's been Chase Elliott that did it with Bill Elliott a couple times, and then there's Ryan Blaney, who's done it a couple times for his dad, Dave Blaney. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, still, really great job with this paint scheme nonetheless. Now, the next paint scheme we got here, we have Joey Logano's paint scheme. Now, Logano, he's throwing it really way back to his early days of racing. As this throwback scheme, it's a throwback to a quarter midget that Logano ran in the mid-1990s. So, this is like when Logano first started racing. Because around the mid-90s, this is around when Logano, this paint scheme was around the scheme that Logano ran when he was like 5, 6, 7 years old. So yeah, really throwing it back to his early days. I mean, that's when drivers throw it back to their early days when they first start racing. These kind of paint schemes I like the most, mainly because of the story behind it too. Because not only do you gotta look at a paint scheme from the design perspective it too, the best paint schemes also have a great story behind it too. So you gotta throw that one in there too. So yeah, see, I really like the paint scheme here. They did a great job nailing the paint scheme, and there's a great story behind it too. So yeah, really like that. So yeah, really great job from Logano and Penske Racing for nailing this scheme. Now the next paint scheme here, we have Bubba Wallace's paint scheme. Now for Bubba Wallace, he's throwing it back to his early days of racing as well, as this is a throwback to a late model car that Bubba Wallace ran back in 2008. So this is like when Bubba was really starting before he came into NASCAR, because he went through the Arco East Series back when it was the K&N East, and then Trucks, and then Xfinity, and now Cup today. So yeah, overall for this paint scheme, they did a pretty good job nailing this scheme. You know, of course, the story behind it. You know, really like the stories about drivers throwing it back to their early days when they first started getting their feet wet in NASCAR. So yeah, really like this scheme. A lot of boomers are probably going to fucking complain about it because, you know, they're fucking boomers. That's not fucking surprising in the slightest. But yeah, anyway, fuck them boomers. And yeah, still, great paint scheme here. And the boomers can go fucking cry me a river. So now, this paint scheme is going to bring back a lot of nostalgia for a lot of HMS fans with this one. Because now we get to William Byron's paint scheme. And for William Byron's paint scheme, this throwback has been long overdue. And it's about time they finally did it. As this throwback scheme, This is a throwback to Jeff Gordon's old DuPont Flames paint scheme, specifically the one he ran in 2007. So yeah, about time we finally got to see the DuPont Flames paint scheme of any kind. Finally get a throwback here. Now, a lot of fans have been waiting a long time for this. So yeah, this is a really good paint scheme. They did a really good job nailing it, especially with the number placement. Yeah, I mean, you look at this, though, for a lot of HMS fans, this is the paint scheme they grew up watching Jeff Gordon race in as growing up. Especially me growing up as a kid, this was the paint scheme I grew up watching the most. Because Jeff Gordon ran the Flames paint scheme from 2001 all the way to the day he retired back in 2015. So yeah, really great paint scheme here. Really like it here. Getting those good childhood feels. So yeah, Byron finally throwing it back to a lot of childhood dreams for HMS fans. So yeah, really great job. About time they finally paid tribute to that DuPont Flames paint scheme from Jeff Gordon. About time. So the next paint scheme we have here, we have Cole Custer's paint scheme. As Cole Custer's paying tribute to the late Jason Leffler's paint scheme that he won the Xfinity race at Nashville in 2004. So we have a Jason Leffler throwback here. So yeah, really like this paint scheme, throwing it back to one of the few times that Jason Leffler won an Xfinity. Too bad Leffler couldn't get a few more wins, especially in his later years of his Xfinity career. You know, Jason Leffler was taken from us way too soon. So yeah, great job from Cole Custer and Stuart Haas paying tribute to Leffler. Really great job with this paint scheme and tribute here. Rest in peace, Jason Leffler. So for the next paint schemes here, we're going to do another 2-for-1 special here with Petty GMS's paint schemes for Ty Dillon and Eric Jones, since both of them are also throwing it back to the same race and throwing it back to the Petty. So we're going to go over both paint schemes here. So for Ty Dillon is throwing it back to Lee Petty's paint scheme from 1959, specifically the paint scheme that Lee Petty won the inaugural Daytona 500 in 1959. And Eric Jones, it's a throwback to Richard Petty. How original. But this time, it's a throwback to the paint scheme that Richard Petty ran in 1959 in that exact same inaugural Daytona 500. So yeah, both Dillon and Jones are paying tribute to the 1959 500 for the Pettys, since Richard Petty made one of his first starts in the Cup Series in 1959 in that 500. And of course, Lee Petty being the inaugural Daytona 500 champion in 1959. And we all know the story about that 500, where initially Johnny Beauchamp was awarded the win because it was decided in a photo finish. And then it took 3 days to decide to finish, since back in the 50s they didn't have electronic timing and scoring. And they didn't do a good job of keeping track of it, so they had to rely on outside sources for photos of the finish, in which they had a photographer get a perfect snapshot of the finish. And after 3 days of reviewing it, they then awarded the 500 to Lee Petty after review. And of course, that photo finish between Lee Petty and Johnny Beauchamp, that photo remains an image of a piece of NASCAR history. Because the 500 being the biggest race of the season, the biggest race in NASCAR, and that was the first ever one. So yeah, really great job that they're paying tribute to that 1959 Daytona 500. Great job from both of them for paying tribute to that race. So the next paint scheme we got here, we got Kurt Busch's paint scheme. As Kurt Busch, he's throwing it back to the McDonald's paint scheme that Bill Elliott ran in 1996. So yeah, really great job with this paint scheme, nailing the details. To be perfectly honest though, if I thought anyone was going to do a McDonald's throwback scheme to Bill Elliott, I thought it was going to be Bubba Wallace, but it's Kurt Busch. And I believe this is actually the first time since 2018 that Kurt Busch has done a Darlington throwback scheme. Because the last few years, Kurt Busch has not done a throwback scheme. Now, technically in 2019, Kurt Busch did do a throwback scheme to his 1999 Southwest Series championship win. But that paint scheme was run at Las Vegas, not Darlington in 2019. But yeah, Kurt Busch, his first throwback paint scheme since 2018 in his first year with 2311. Not a bad job with this paint scheme with McDonald's. So yeah, great job here from Kurt Busch getting that paint scheme. Hail the sex god, Kurt Busch. So the next paint scheme we got here, we have Alex Bowman's paint scheme. Now for Bowman's paint scheme, his paint scheme is a throwback to the paint scheme that Mark Martin ran in 1993. Specifically, the paint scheme that Mark Martin won the 1993 Southern 500 at Darlington in. And that win at Darlington in 1993, that capped off Mark Martin's streak of winning 4 races in a row in 1993. Since Mark Martin is one of 8 drivers, 7, I believe it's 7 or 8 drivers, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 8. But anyway, he was one of the few listed drivers that have won 4 races in a row in the modern era. So yeah, Alex Bowman throwing it back to that paint scheme, and they did a really good job with this paint scheme, especially making the right adjustments with the number placement. So yeah, really great job here from Bowman and HMS for throwing it back to that Mark Martin paint scheme. And of course, we all know that 4 in a row has not been done since 2007 with Jimmy Johnson, when Jimmy Johnson won 4 in a row to end off the year. And of course, we almost saw it happen last year with Kyle Larson. Twice, Larson had a chance to do it, but the closest it happened was at Pocono last year when Larson was leading on the last lap, and then he blew his tire in the last turn. And that race ended up being won by Alex Bowman. How fitting. And to be perfectly honest, that Pocono win last year from Bowman, that's like the only time in Bowman's career that Bowman has truly backed into a win. But still, anyway, getting back to this paint scheme, though, really great job for Bowman and HMS nailing this paint scheme and paying tribute to Mark Martin. Great job for Bowman there. And the final throwback scheme we're going to talk about in this video, we have BJ McCloud's paint scheme. As BJ McCloud is throwing it back to himself in his early days of racing. As this throwback scheme is a throwback to a super late model scheme that he ran in 2004. So yeah, really like this scheme, really like the story behind it. So yeah, BJ McCloud and Live Fast Motorsports did a great job with this paint scheme for sure. And also a quick honorable mention to Josh Williams in this photo too, as Williams is also going to be throwing it back to that same paint scheme that BJ McCloud ran in 2004 in the Xfinity race this weekend. No, we're not talking about the Xfinity paint schemes here. We're only talking about the Cup paint schemes here, but I will give Josh Williams an honorable mention because his paint scheme also does a great job too. So yeah, in terms of me doing Xfinity paint schemes, this is the closest you'll see to it. But yeah, anyway though, great job for BJ McCloud with this paint scheme, and great job here for it too. But yeah, anyway, that will wrap up this video here, going over the throwback schemes. So overall, a lot of the teams have some really good throwback schemes for sure. Some really great ideas here. You know, there are a couple paint schemes that were executed pretty poorly or lacked originality. And then others that got ruined because of fucking copyrighted from some fucking wicked bitch of the South. And the less said about that wicked bitch, the better. But yeah, still, pretty good throwback schemes. Now, there's a number of paint schemes that haven't been announced yet, or drivers that haven't announced if they're doing a throwback scheme or not. Like, the big 3 that haven't announced anything yet, you have, like, Ryan Blaney hasn't announced anything yet. Truex Martin Jr. hasn't either, along with Austin Dillon and Eric Almirola. So some pretty big names here. Like, there's still, because there's 36 cars in the field this weekend, and we only have, like, 23 of the paint schemes here. So yeah, there's still like 13 cars that are still undecided, because some teams, like, they're not gonna like announce their throwback until right before the race, or it won't be revealed till right before the race. There are some teams that are not gonna do a throwback scheme, and then there are also gonna be some teams that aren't gonna do throwbacks until the Labor Day race, aka the Southern 500 at Darlington on Labor Day weekend in September. So yeah, there's that too, since a lot of people still consider the Southern 500 as a true throwback race. But yeah, still, some pretty good paint schemes here. Like, in terms of my favorite paint scheme, I don't really have one favorite paint scheme, as there's been a lot of great paint schemes in here. Like, of course, you have Larson's paint scheme paying tribute to Tim Richmond. You also got, whatchamacallit. Oh yeah, you also got Corey with Joy's paint scheme, which I like, because that one paid a lot of attention to detail. You also got Cole Custer's paint scheme here. I mean, not Cole Custer, I mean William Byron's paint scheme. Paying tribute to Jeff Gordon for nostalgia reasons. And Alex Bowman's Darlington paint scheme to Mark Martin. That's a really good paint scheme there. Like, those are my, like, I really think I have tied for 4 favorites, and those are the 4 favorites right there. In terms of what I think were the worst paint schemes, I gotta say Cindric's was the worst paint scheme because of lack of execution. Because of the coloring for it. And I also got to throw in Christopher Bell's paint scheme because that one lacked originality since they already did a throwback to his 2017 championship season. But yeah, still, there were still some pretty good paint schemes nonetheless. A pretty good batch of cars for throwback weekend. But yeah, anyway though, yeah, of course some of these paint schemes, some fans will argue that some of these paint schemes got ruined because of the number placement. Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not really a big fan of the number placement, though, for the throwback weekend. I mean, there are teams that did nail the schemes, and some teams have proved that the number placement for throwback weekend can work, if done correctly. But to be perfectly honest, for the number placement, I think it should be optional. I think it should be like the Penny Series in Canada, where it's optional, where the teams can decide amongst themselves where they want to put the number, whether they want to put it in the center for, quote, me tradition, or if they want to put it near the front tire or the rear tire, or hell, even put it on the fucking rear quarter panel. Like, I think the teams should decide amongst themselves where to put the number and have it be a self-policing issue. Like, I don't think that it should be mandatory where the number's put. I think it should be optional, and it should be the teams and drivers' choice where to put the number, not NASCAR's. Like, that's just my opinion, though, because I'm pro-choice. But, yeah, I'm pro-choice. Even for abortions, I'm pro-choice. But, yeah, anyway, though, that'll wrap it up here. That's all I gotta say. Hope everyone was a great day. And, yeah, there's gonna be some good throwback schemes here. You know, there's gonna be a few throwback schemes, of course, I need to go over because they haven't been revealed yet. But, yeah, still, anyway, that'll wrap it up here, and I'll see you all whatever I make next. Peace.